you saw a video of print art on Instagram or TikTok and want to know more about how it works, or maybe you're just looking to pick up a new hobby. In any case, welcome. This video is going to be your first step into the world of printmaking. Doesn't matter if you're new to print or new to art in general, this video is going to help you get started, and after following along, you'll have made your first ever print. Before we get started, let's take a look at what you'll need. Now, this list might seem overwhelming at first, but I promise that this stuff can be easily found at your local art supply store or online. And if you happen to have troubles finding something on this list, I recommend watching the whole video first before you get started. That way you'll know what it's used for and you'll be able to use your better judgment when finding a replacement. Every artist is different, but here are the materials that I like to use and will be using in this video. First off is some oil-based printing ink like a speedball ink, an ink roller, a speedball carving tool, a block of softoleum or linoleum, although keep in mind that linoleum is a little bit harder to carve, some gloves, a scraping tool or a palette knife, a flat plastic or other non-porous material that you don't mind getting ink on, some paper. I prefer to use cotton paper, but if you're not sure what to look for, some cotton acid-free watercolor paper is a good place to start. A large flat spoon, some shop towels, a pencil, a permanent marker, and a ruler. I recommend a flat ruler for what we'll be using it for. And finally, a design. Now, some things to keep in mind when you're designing the image that you want to print. First off, it should be something simple that is easy to carve by hand. Second of all, it will only be two-toned. It will be the color of the ink and the color of the paper. So say, for example, if the ink you're using is black, and the paper is white, then the image can only be black and white, no gray. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that the final design that you print will be flipped. So if you're using any sort of writing in your design, keep in mind that it'll be backwards once you print it. Once you have all that, all you need is a couple free hours and you're ready to get started. The first step is to transfer your design onto your softoleum block. So for this, you'll need your design, a pencil, and your softoleum block. Let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is flip your design onto the back and start coloring all over the back with your pencil. Be careful not to miss any single spots. This is important. Then, once it's all colored up and full of graphite, you put it onto your softoleum block and trace over your design. This will transfer the graphite onto the block and transfer your image with it. Once your image is transferred onto the block, you'll want to go over it with a permanent marker. This will make it so that it doesn't smudge when you're carving, and it'll make it easier to see. Next up, it's time to break out your carving tool because you're ready to start carving your block. I recommend starting with the smallest blade for precision and working your way up to the largest one because it's easier to go back and carve a part that you missed than it is to fix a part that you didn't mean to carve but did by accident. I also advise you to always carve away from yourself and away from your hand. Now, this is a mistake that every print artist has made. It's easier to carve pointing towards you or pointing towards your hand, but I promise you, at some point or another, you will slip and you will hit your hand and those blades are sharp and it will hurt. So please, even if you see me doing it in the video pointing towards my hand, do as I say, not as I do. It will be a million times safer and you will end up in a lot less pain. Something important to keep in mind during this stage is that carving is the inversion of drawing. So anything that you carve away will not be in the final image. Anything that you leave will be in the final image. So just remember, anything you're carving will be the color of paper and anything you're leaving will be the color of ink. You'll see what I mean once we get started. This is what my block looked like after I finished carving. I went over it again with a Sharpie just to catch if there was anything that I missed. And if you did miss a spot, don't worry, you can always go back and carve it even after you already started printing. It's an easy fix. The next step is to prepare our paper. So as you can see, I already measured and folded my paper before I started ripping it. That's right, I said ripping, not cutting. Of course, if you want to cut your paper, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not the printing police, but it is very prevalent in printed art to have those stylized ripped edges, so I recommend at least giving it a try. So what you do is you fold your paper, you line up your ruler on the flat end, right up against that crease, press it down, grab the corner, and you just pull against the edge and it'll rip very cleanly. Now, if you don't get this right the first time, don't be discouraged. It takes practice. I've done this lots of times. Eventually, it'll become quite easy and it'll become second nature, I promise. Just keep practicing. When you're measuring your paper, you don't want it to be the size of your block. You'll want to keep space on all of the edges, almost like a frame around it. And you'll want to keep extra space at the bottom because we're going to sign it later. And if you're in any doubt about how big to make your paper, it's better to make it a little bit too big than a little bit too small because you can always go back and rip it. Like as you can see in the video, I made mine a little bit too long. That's fine, I can go back and fix it. I can't make the paper bigger if I need to, but I can make it smaller. Once your paper is ready, you're going to want to make a registration sheet. And what this does is it helps us keep our image centered every time we print it. It's pretty easy to make. All you have to do is grab your paper, trace it on a piece of, I don't know, regular printer paper, anything you have handy. I have two different kinds of paper that I'm using, slightly different sizes, so I'm tracing both of them just to make sure they're both centered. And then you take your softoleum block, you measure it to make sure that it's centered within the paper that you just traced, make sure that you have extra space at the bottom, make sure everything is lined up, and you trace that one. And then when you start printing, you just put the block in that little traced square, put your paper in its little traced square, and it's going to be centered every time. And because there's a little bit of extra space at the bottom, I like to label mine top and bottom, just in case it gets moved around a little bit. I know which way is up, which way is down, and it's going to look great every single time. A couple minutes before you're ready to start printing, you're going to want to fill up your sink or a tub and submerge your paper in it. You'll want to leave it for about 5 to 10 minutes if you're using the watercolor paper, not much longer than that. And about a minute before you're ready to use it, take that piece of paper out, pat it dry with just a regular soft towel, and you're ready to go. Remember here that the goal is damp paper, not wet paper. Once everything is set up and ready to go, you're going to want to throw on some old clothes and a pair of gloves because this next step is super fun, but also super messy. We're going to start printing. Now the first step to start printing is you're going to want to prepare your inks. If you like the color of the ink that you have straight out of the jar, it's totally fine to use it like that. But I was always taught that it's best to mix your own color because it'll be unique to you and your artwork. So you'll see me mixing a nice shade of warm brown in this video using red and black inks. I'm just taking them out of the jar with my little scrapey tool, putting them on the palette, mixing them together, and then I'm going to start rolling them out. When you're rolling out your ink, you don't want to stick to one small spot. You want to roll out a nice, big, even patch, and you're going to want to roll in different directions. Make sure that the consistency is nice and even. It's not too thin, it's not too thick. This is also going to help make sure it's evenly spread all over your roller so that when you start spreading it all over your softoleum block, it's going to be a nice, even delivery of ink, and it's going to make the print nice and even. You're going to want to keep rolling until you hit a consistency that looks almost like velvet, like almost like a small patch of velvet on your palette. So when you look at it, it's almost got a demi-matte shine to it. This is going to be perfect. It's going to be nice and even, and it's going to be the perfect consistency. Rolling ink onto your softoleum block is essentially the exact same movement. So once you have enough ink on your roller, you're going to roll it onto your softoleum block in different directions to make sure you're not missing any spots and to make sure the ink is nice and even. If you feel like you don't have enough ink or you've missed a spot, you can go back and pick up some more by just rolling it again on your palette, but you don't want to do this too often because if you have a little bit too much ink, it is going to make the print a little bit blotchy. And in this step, if you notice a couple leftover spots that you didn't carve, you can also carve them now before you print, or you can just leave them for the first print. I find that they add some character. That's just my personal opinion. This is when you're going to want to grab that damp piece of paper and align it over the block, not touching the block yet. You're going to want to align it with that tracing that we already did, and then once you think it's aligned, gently lay it over the block. Now keep in mind that once it touches the block, you can't readjust it because that'll smudge the ink. So you're going to want to try and get it right the first time, but if you don't worry, you've got plenty more tries if you ripped a lot of paper. Then you're going to want to take your flat spoon, and if you want to keep it steady with one hand, you can. Just make sure not to apply too much pressure. With the spoon, you're going to want to gently apply dispersed pressure over the entire block, over the entire page, to make sure that the ink transfers evenly everywhere and you don't miss any spots. Because once you already have the paper touching the block, you can't take it off and realign it. You're going to want to get it right the first time. But like I said, you can keep trying and do as many prints as you have to before you get a perfect one. Now we get to gently peel back the paper and take a look at our masterpiece. And don't worry if it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to. The nice thing about printmaking is you can make as many prints as you need to. Once you're satisfied with all your prints and you're ready to clean up for the day, this is how you're going to want to do it. Now, the important thing to keep in mind here is that the ink we used is oil-based, so you really want to limit how much is going down the drain. The first thing we do is we take our scraping tool and we scrape up the excess ink off of the palette. Now, if you used a color straight out of the jar, then this is going to be easy because all the excess ink you can just put right back into the jar and use for next time. If you mixed your own unique color like I did, and you still have a lot of ink left over on the palette, then you can grab an extra container and store it for later so that you can use it again. But if you don't have a lot of ink left over, or you just don't think you'll use that color again, you can go ahead and wipe up that excess with a shop towel. Those are meant to absorb oil, so they're going to be really handy for cleaning up. Then, once all the excess ink is wiped off of the palette, you're going to want to use those shop towels to just wipe everything down once. Try and get as much ink off as you can before we start cleaning with soap. Once you've cleaned the excess ink off of everything with the shop towels, then you're going to want to take a mixture of dish soap and water to clean up the rest of the ink residue. This stuff works magic and it'll help you get everything perfectly clean again so that it's easy to store and you won't have any ink transfer. You'll be ready to use it again whenever you want. The final step in our printmaking journey is to sign the good copies once they've dried. So for this, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to group all of your good copies together based on their color, size, and paper type. Then you're going to want to take a pencil and start signing it. So within one edition, the edition refers to the size, color, and paper type, etc. You're going to write the number. So if you have 3 copies in your edition, you're going to label them 1/3, so 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, and 3 out of 3. Then in the middle, you're going to write the title of your artwork in quotations. And then finally, at the bottom right side, you're going to sign your initials and the year that you created the artwork. And just like that, we're done. You've created your very own print artwork and you'll be able to do it again whenever you want. I hope that you found this video helpful, and if you discovered any helpful tricks along the way, don't be scared to leave a comment and help out your fellow beginners. If you enjoyed my video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see more art content like this. Thanks for watching!